The House That Stayed. Chapter 1. The Bridge in Autumn. The wind came down from the hills, dry and cool, carrying the smell of fallen apples and wood smoke. It was the kind of afternoon that made time move differently, slow enough that you could feel it but not enough to stop it. He stood on the old iron bridge, his hands in his pockets, watching the river move beneath. The water was thin now, low after a dry summer. It moved quiet, slipping around the stones. Her car came up the road from town, the sound of gravel before the sight of her. He didn't turn until the door slammed shut. "Still standing out here," she said. He smiled without looking. "You found me." "I always do." They had met 3 years before in a library that no longer existed. She was reading Rilke. He was pretending to work. She asked if he believed people could change. He said he wasn't sure. Now she stood beside him on the bridge, her hair pulled back, gray showing at the temples. She looked older, but in a way that suited her. "I heard you sold the house," she said. "I did." "Was it hard?" "It was time." She leaned on the railing. The sun cut across her face. "You still write?" "Some." "What about the book you were working on?" "It's gone." "Gone?" "Burned it." She looked at him sharply. "You burned it?" "Yes." She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. The wind picked up, carrying leaves off the trees and into the water. They walked back toward town. The road curved through fields and thin woods. He carried a paper bag from the market, a loaf of bread and a bottle of red wine. "You could have told me," she said after a while. "I didn't think it mattered." "It did." He looked at her. "You left first." She nodded. "I did." There wasn't anger in her voice, only something like fatigue, the kind that comes from remembering too much. They passed a field where the corn had already been cut. The ground looked stripped bare, the stalks left to rot in rows. "I kept one thing," he said. "What's that?" "Your letter." She smiled a little. "The one I wrote from Maine?" "Yes." "What did I say?" "You said you hoped I'd learn to be kind." She laughed softly. "Did you?" He didn't answer. At the edge of town they came to the inn. It was old and white with green shutters, and the porch boards creaked underfoot. She had a room upstairs. He had one too, though neither had said so. "Come in for a drink," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. Inside the air was warm and close. A few people sat at the bar. A man played the piano, something slow and steady. They found a table by the window. She poured the wine. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "All the time." "What part?" "The end." "Not the beginning?" "I remember that too. But endings tell you more." She touched the glass to her lips, then set it down. "You always believed that. That everything worth knowing came too late." "Maybe it does." They sat quiet for a time. The piano kept on. Someone laughed at the bar. Outside, the last of the daylight went down behind the hills. When they went upstairs, she stopped at her door. The hall smelled of old wood and lavender. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She looked at him. There was a pause, something unspoken in it, something like the sound of the river still running in the dark. "Would you come in for a while?" He hesitated, then nodded again. Inside, the room was small. A lamp burned low on the table. Her suitcase was open, clothes folded neatly inside. He took off his jacket, set it over a chair. "I didn't come here to start anything," he said. "I know." "Then why?" "To see if it was still there." He looked at her. "And is it?" She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of her hair. "Yes," she said. "But different." "How?" "Quieter." They talked for a long time, not about the past but about what had filled the years between. The city she'd lived in, the students she'd taught, the winters that had gone by like slow dreams. He told her about his brother's death, the small garden he tried to keep alive, the mornings when the writing didn't come. "You always thought you'd be someone else by now," she said. "Maybe I am." "Not really." He smiled. "Maybe not." When the lamp finally went out, the moonlight came through the curtains, soft and blue. She slept, her hand resting on his arm. He watched the ceiling, listening to the small sounds of the night, the floorboards, the wind outside, the faint rhythm of her breath. He thought of the book he'd burned, the pages curling, turning to ash. Words gone to nothing. Maybe that was what love was too. A quiet undoing, a necessary burning. In the morning, he woke to find her gone. Only a note left on the table. It said, "There's a train at noon. Come if you can. Or don't. Either way, it was good to see you." He read it twice, then folded it and put it in his coat pocket. Outside, the river moved slow under the bridge. The sun came up pale through the mist. He could hear the whistle of a train somewhere far off, echoing through the hills. He stood there a long while, not moving, not deciding. Then he started walking toward town. Chapter 2: The train to Concord. The train was late. It waited somewhere down the valley, its whistle drifting through the fog like a question. The morning was pale and still, and the station looked older than it had yesterday. Paint flaking, benches wet with dew, the boards creaking when he stepped on them. He carried a small leather bag. It wasn't much: 2 shirts, a notebook, a razor. The kind of bag a man takes when he isn't sure he'll be staying long. He sat on the bench and watched the mist lift off the fields. Beyond the tracks, the hills rolled away in quiet folds, the trees already turning gold rust brown. The air smelled of damp iron and cold leaves. She came a few minutes before the train. He heard her footsteps before he saw her, the click of her shoes on the wood. She was wearing a dark blue coat and a scarf that looked like it had been knitted long ago. "You came," she said. "I did. I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I." She smiled faintly, the way she used to when she was trying to hide how much something meant. They stood together by the platform's edge, looking down the line. "Concord," she said softly, as if the word itself were an idea rather than a place. "You remember it?" "I remember the river," he said. "And the cold mornings. And the bookstore." He nodded. "The old man with the crooked glasses." She laughed. "He thought we were thieves." "We kind of were." "Yes. We stole afternoons." The train came in slow, the engine sighing, the cars clattering as if weary from too much travel. They climbed aboard, found 2 seats by a window. The carriage was nearly empty, just an old couple asleep against each other, and a man reading a paper he wasn't really reading. The train began to move. For a while neither spoke. The fields went by. The river flashed silver in the distance. Finally she said, "You look better." "Better than what?" "Than before." "Before what?" "Before you stopped caring." He turned to her. "You think that's what happened?" "I think you disappeared." He looked back out the window. The trees were thin now, giving way to marshes and open land. "Maybe I did," he said. "Sometimes it's easier than staying." She reached into her coat pocket and took out a small book. Worn leather, cracked along the spine. "I found this in a box last week," she said. "It's yours." He looked at it. "My notebook." "Yes. I thought it was gone." "You left it behind." "In Maine." He took it, turned it over in his hands. The pages were filled with his handwriting. Half-thoughts, sentences cut off. Poems that never finished. "You used to write like you were afraid to stop," she said. He smiled a little. "Maybe I was." "What were you afraid of?" "Losing the sound." "What sound?" "The one that tells you what comes next." She nodded as if she understood. Maybe she did. She had always understood more than she admitted. They passed through small towns, red barns, silos, schoolyards empty for Sunday. The train hummed steady underfoot, a kind of heartbeat. He opened the notebook and began to read from one of the old pages. His voice was low, uncertain. "I dreamed of her walking ahead of me through snow," called out. But the sound didn't carry. It was like shouting through glass. He stopped. She said, "That winter." "Yes. You were sick." "Not sick. Just tired. You wouldn't let me in." "I didn't know how." She looked at him. "You still don't, do you?" He didn't answer. The train slowed as it climbed. The land changed, rockier with pine woods and granite ledges. The mist had burned off, and the sun was sharp through the glass. "You ever think we just mistimed it?" she asked. "All the time." "You think that's all it was?" "No," he said. "But it's enough." She turned to look out the window. "Maybe there's no right time. Just people trying to make one." "Maybe." They sat quiet again, the rhythm of the train filling the space between words. At noon they reached Concord. The station was small and clean, with a coffee cart by the door and a few students waiting with their backpacks. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke. She looked around. It hasn't changed much. No, he said. But we have. They walked through the square, past the church, past the old library that had closed years ago. A bookstore still stood at the corner, though the window held new titles now. Let's go in, she said. Inside the light was soft. The shelves ran close together the way they used to. The floorboards made that same low sound underfoot. An old woman sat behind the counter reading. She looked up and smiled at them without a word. They wandered through the aisles. She ran her fingers along the spines, stopping here and there. He picked up a thin volume of essays and turned it over in his hands. Remember what you said once? She asked. What did I say? That books are like people. You open them hoping they'll know something you don't. He smiled. I was younger then. You're still that way. They bought 2 coffees and sat outside on a bench. The wind had picked up again, stirring the leaves around their feet. What happens now? He asked. I don't know, she said. Maybe nothing. Would that be so bad? No. Maybe it would be right. They sat for a while without speaking, watching people pass. Students, a mother with a stroller, a man walking a golden retriever. Finally she said, There's a lecture tonight at the college. On Thoreau. I thought I might go. You always did like Thoreau. He understood silence. He nodded. He did. You could come, she said. He looked at her. Do you want me to? She hesitated. Yes. But not if it means something it shouldn't. He smiled faintly. Everything means something. That's the trouble, she said. They walked back toward the inn near the river. The afternoon was cooling fast, the sky going gray at the edges. At the door she turned to him. Will you come tonight? I think so. She nodded, and for a moment they just stood there. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was something else, something that had learned to breathe. Then I'll see you there, she said. See you there. She went inside. He watched her go, then turned toward the river. The water was moving faster here, shallow and bright. The sound of it reminded him of another time, another beginning, another end. He took out the notebook, thumbed through it until he found a blank page. He took out a pencil. He began to write. Not about her. Not about what had been. But about the train, the mist, the sound of footsteps on old wood. When the church bell rang 6 times in the distance, he closed the book and stood up. He looked once toward the inn, then toward the college where the light was beginning to glow in the windows. He started walking again. Chapter through the lecture hall. The evening settled in quietly, the way October does when it remembers summer is gone. The lamps along the main street came on one by one, halos in the cooling air. The leaves made small dry sounds underfoot. He walked slowly, notebook in his pocket, hands deep in his coat. The town was calm, emptied of hurry. Students moved in pairs toward the college, their laughter thin and bright against the dusk. The lecture hall stood at the edge of campus, a brick building with wide steps and tall windows that held the light like still water. Inside, the air smelled of paper, varnish, and time. He found her near the back, sitting alone. She turned when she felt him there. I thought you might not come, she said. I almost didn't. But you did. Yes. They sat side by side as people filled the rows. The old professor stepped to the front, his white hair lit by the soft overhead lamps. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to speak. The lecture was on solitude, on how Thoreau believed it wasn't absence, but presence sharpened to its edge. How silence could be a kind of prayer. The professor's voice was low and steady. He wrote that he went to the woods to live deliberately, the man said. But perhaps he stayed because he found himself there. We all leave home, and then spend the rest of our years trying to return by other roads. The words hung in the air. She looked at him from the corner of her eye, but he didn't move. When the lecture ended, the room emptied slow. People lingered in the aisles, shaking hands, talking softly. Outside, the night had turned cold. The sky was clear, the stars small and sharp. She said, Let's walk a bit. He nodded. They went across the green, past the statue, past the old oak where someone had tied a string of paper lanterns that flickered faintly in the wind. I liked what he said, she began. About what? Returning by other roads. Yes. You think that's what we're doing? He took a moment before answering. Maybe. Or maybe we're just circling the same map. They stopped by a bench near the pond. The water was black, the moon lying thin across it. She sat. He stayed standing. You always did prefer walking, she said. I don't like to stop. You think stopping means losing? Sometimes. She looked up at him. You used to say stillness was the only way to see clearly. I used to say a lot of things. She smiled. You still do. They sat there a while, the sound of crickets carrying through the cold air. A car passed somewhere on the far road. I went back to Maine last spring, she said finally. Oh, the cabin's gone. They tore it down. I'm not surprised. I thought it would make me sad, but it didn't. It felt finished. He nodded. Things end. Do they? Eventually. She shook her head slightly. I don't know. I keep thinking endings are only pauses. He looked at her. You still hope too much. Someone has to. He sat beside her then. The bench creaked. Their shoulders brushed lightly, a small electric thing that neither of them named. You remember that night? She asked. Which one? The storm. The one that knocked the power out. You read to me by candlelight. I remember. You read that poem about the sea. I remember that too. I thought you meant it for me. I did. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you still? He took a slow breath. Meaning doesn't go away. It just changes its shape. They walked back toward the street. The shops were closing, lights dimming one by one. The window of the bakery glowed faintly. Someone was sweeping inside. You staying another night? She asked. I haven't decided. You should. He looked at her, half smiling. Why? Because leaving tonight would feel like running. He laughed softly. Maybe I'm good at that. I know. They came to the corner where the road split. One way toward the inn, the other toward the station. The air between them felt careful. He said, would you have done it differently? She tilted her head. What do you mean? Us. She thought a long while before answering. No. Maybe just slower. The bell from the church struck 9. She said, come to breakfast tomorrow. He nodded. Where? The cafe by the bridge. 9:30. All right. Promise. I'll try. She smiled faintly. That's as close as you get. He watched her walk away, her coat moving with the wind, the sound of her steps fading down the cobblestone street. He walked back toward the inn. The town was quiet now. The lamp outside flickered once, then steadied. He could see the river from his window, pale under the moonlight, restless and low. He took off his coat and sat by the small desk. The notebook lay open from the morning. He looked at the words he had written and read them again, then turned the page. He began a new line. She waited by the bridge, and I thought of the years as trains, each one passing, none of them stopping long enough to climb aboard. He stopped, set the pencil down, and looked out the window. The night held still, as if it too were waiting for something unnamed. Chapter 4. Breakfast by the bridge. Morning came soft and gray, with a low mist over the river. The kind of light that blurred edges and made everything look almost kind. He woke early and sat by the window, watching the town come alive. The baker's truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere a church bell tolled 8. He washed, shaved, put on the same shirt he'd worn the day before. The mirror in the small room showed a face lined more deeply than he remembered. He looked at it for a long moment, then turned away. Outside, the air had that early autumn chill that sits just above freezing but smells of wet leaves and stone. He walked slowly down to the cafe by the bridge. She was already there. She sat at a small table near the window, a newspaper folded beside her, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The window fogged with each breath. You're early, he said. I didn't sleep much. Me neither. He took off his coat and sat opposite her. The table was small, their knees almost touching beneath it. You always ordered the same thing, she said. He smiled. Still do. Black coffee and toast. He nodded. You remember everything. I try to forget, she said. But it never works. The waitress came, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a pen tucked behind her ear. She took their order and left without hurry. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and bitter. "So," she said, stirring her cup though she'd already finished the sugar. "Will you go back?" "Back where?" "Home. Wherever that is now." "I don't know that I have one." She looked at him. "You could." "How?" "By staying somewhere long enough." He laughed softly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Just not easy." The food came. Toast, eggs, a bowl of berries that looked too bright for the gray morning. They ate quietly. Outside, a pair of ducks drifted down the river, breaking the surface in slow ripples. She said, "I start teaching again next week." "Still literature?" "Yes. Different faces, same questions." "What kind of questions?" "The ones people ask when they want to believe in something." He smiled. "That's a kind of faith." "It is." She paused. "You used to have it." "Maybe I misplaced it." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe you buried it." He watched the river. The mist had thinned and sunlight broke through in small patches, like grace finding its way through clouds. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "What?" "Leaving." "Yes," she said. "And no." He nodded. "That's fair." "You." Same answer. The waitress brought more coffee. They sat in silence for a while. It was a good silence, the kind that had shape like something built carefully over time. Then she said, "You know, I kept waiting for a letter. I wrote one once." "Why didn't you send it?" "I didn't know what to say." "You could have said anything." He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "Anything would have been too much." She smiled sadly. "You always did overthink mercy." A small group of students passed by the window laughing. One of them carried a book under his arm, thin, with a worn green cover. He recognized it. "The Old Man and the Sea," he said quietly. She followed his gaze. "You taught that one." "I did." "Still your favorite?" He nodded. "It knows about loss. And endurance." She smiled faintly. "You love stories that end with quiet defeat. They're the true ones." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Not all of them." The light shifted. The morning had warmed slightly. The cafe filled with the soft noise of plates and spoons and murmured conversation. She said, "I don't know what I expected seeing you again." "What did you find?" She thought a moment. "Someone still trying to live like he's half ghost." He chuckled. "And you?" "Someone still looking for the part she left behind." They looked at each other for a long moment. Something unspoken but certain passed between them. A memory, a forgiveness, or maybe just recognition. When they stepped outside, the river shone under a pale sun. The mist had burned away completely. "You going to the station?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Decide soon. There's a train at noon." He nodded. She touched his arm lightly. "If you leave right this time." "I might. Even if it's just a line." He looked at her. "What would you want it to say?" "Anything that sounds like a beginning." They walked to the bridge. The water moved smooth and steady beneath them, clearer now than it had been in days. She stopped halfway across. "This used to be our spot." "It still is," he said. They leaned on the railing shoulder to shoulder. The wind moved her hair across his sleeve. "You know," she said, "I think people don't fall out of love. They just learn to carry it differently." He nodded. "Maybe that's true." "It's lighter now," she said. "But it's still there." He smiled faintly. "Like the sound of the river." "Yes," she said. "Exactly like that." A bell rang faintly from town, the signal for the next train. She turned to him. "If you stay, I'll see you tonight." He looked down at the river once more. "And if I don't?" "Then I'll still look for your name in print somewhere. In something that finally ends well." He smiled, though his eyes were wet. "That's asking a lot." She touched his hand. "No. That's hope." She walked back toward town, her figure growing smaller in the sunlight. He stayed on the bridge, watching until she disappeared beyond the hill. Then he reached into his coat, took out the notebook and opened to the first blank page. The pencil moved slowly at first, then faster. Breakfast by the river. Steam rising from her cup. The sound of her voice, quieter than the water but lasting longer. He stopped, drew a small line under the words, and closed the book. The train whistle sounded again, closer now, waiting. He stood still for a long time, feeling the wind move through him, and for the first time in years, he did not hurry to choose. Chapter 5: The Leaving Hour. The noon train waited with its engine idling, a slow pulse of sound that filled the valley. The sky had turned clear and sharp. The sunlight lay flat on the tracks, bright enough to make him squint. He stood on the platform, the same bag at his feet, the same indecision in his chest. The ticket window was open, the clerk inside reading a small paperback. No one else waited. The bridge was only a few hundred yards away. He could see it if he turned. He didn't. He checked his watch. The minute hand trembled at 12. The air smelled of oil and pine and the faint sweetness of the bakery down the street. He remembered the taste of her coffee, the way she had looked at him just before she walked away. Not sad, not hopeful, just seeing him clearly, maybe for the first time in years. He wanted to write her another line, but there wasn't paper enough for what he meant. The train hissed softly, as if growing impatient. A voice came behind him. "I thought I'd find you here." He turned. It was her. She stood a few steps away, hair caught by the wind, that same blue scarf knotted at her throat. "I told myself not to come," she said. "You always ignore yourself. I learned it from you." They both smiled, tired smiles but real ones. She came closer. "So, are you going?" "I haven't decided." "You'll miss it." "I might." She looked at him for a long moment. "You always wait until the last possible minute. That's when things are most honest. Or most cowardly. Maybe both." The station master stepped out of the office and called, "5 minutes." Then he went back in, leaving the door open to the sound of the ticking clock inside. She said, "If you leave, I won't follow. I wouldn't expect you to. I mean it." "I know. Because last time I did." He nodded. "And last time I didn't notice soon enough." They stood side by side now. The sunlight glinted on the tracks, hard and white. A crow flew low over the station, its shadow passing quick across them both. She said, "You ever think we meet only to practice goodbye?" He smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a discipline." "It is." He looked at her. "Then what do we learn from it?" "That endings aren't failures." He nodded slowly. "No. They're just quiet doors." The train gave a long, low whistle. A man in a cap leaned from the engine window, shouted something he couldn't quite catch. She reached for his hand. Her fingers were cool. "You could stay," she said. "I could." And he looked down at their hands. "I don't know if I'd know what to do with staying." "You'd learn." He looked up. "Would you teach me?" She hesitated. "I could try." The second whistle came, sharper this time. The platform filled with that hum of waiting. The air tightening, the sound of the wheels beginning to turn. He picked up the bag, then set it down again. "You remember what you said?" she asked. "Which thing?" "That love doesn't vanish. It changes its shape." "Yes." She nodded. "Then maybe this is what it looks like now." "What?" "Two people standing on a platform, both brave enough to stay in the same silence." He smiled. "You always did make silence sound holy." "It is, if you listen hard enough." The engine gave a final cough, a metal sigh, and the train began to move. Slow at first, then steady. He didn't step forward. The wind from its passing tugged at her scarf and pressed the smell of iron and heat around them. They watched until the last car disappeared down the line. The sound faded into the hills, leaving only the ticking clock and the faraway murmur of the river. She said, "So that's that." He nodded. "Seems so." "What now?" "Lunch, maybe." She laughed softly. "You think food fixes everything." "It fixes enough to keep us going." She looked down, still smiling. "You didn't buy a ticket, did you?" "No." "Not even one?" He shook his head. "Not even one." They walked together toward the road, past the benches, past the single poster flapping loose in the wind. The bridge waited ahead, the sunlight glinting on the water below it. Halfway there, she slipped her hand into his. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They crossed the bridge slowly. The wind was cold but clean. Below them, the river moved steady, unhurried, as if it had seen all this before. At the far end, she said quietly, "You know you didn't choose." He looked at her. "Didn't I?" She smiled. "Maybe you did. Just differently." They reached the other side. The town stretched out before them, small and familiar. Somewhere a bell marked the hour. He said, "Let's get lunch." She nodded. "All right." They started walking again. Behind them, the tracks ran straight toward the horizon, the last shimmer of the train already gone. The river kept moving. The air carried the faintest scent of coffee and wood smoke. For the first time in a long while, he felt no urgency at all. Only the weight of the day in his chest, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes staying isn't about roots, it's about presence. And presence, he thought, might be the bravest form of love. Chapter 6. The River at Dusk. The day folded itself into evening, slow and deliberate, like an old man setting down his hat. The air had thinned, and the town moved quietly through its last hours of light. Shops closed, children called out from porches, and the river caught the color of the dying sun. He and she walked along the path that followed the water. They said little, only the small words that bridged silence without disturbing it. A leaf floated past, turning in the current. The sound of their footsteps matched the river's rhythm. They stopped by the bench near the willow. The same one from years ago. It leaned a little now but still held its place. She sat first. He stayed standing, looking down at the current. "You always like this time of day," she said. "I still do. It makes things honest." "Because of the light? Because of what it hides?" She nodded. "That sounds like you." He smiled faintly. "Still sounds like us." A pair of geese passed low overhead, their wings breaking the air with slow, heavy beats. The noise faded north. She said, "You remember the night we watched them leave? The first fall we spent here?" "I remember the fire," he said. "And how you said geese never lose their way. I believed that then. And now? I think they just trust the air to carry them." He looked at her. "Maybe that's enough." The light deepened, gold slipping toward amber, then into a soft gray. He sat beside her. For a while neither moved. Then she said, "It's strange, isn't it? How nothing feels finished, but nothing feels broken either." "That's age," he said. "No. That's forgiveness." He turned toward her, searching her face. There were fine lines around her eyes now, the kind that come from sunlight and laughter. He found them beautiful. They watched a boy throwing stones from the opposite bank. Each one skipped twice before sinking. The sound of it reached them after each throw, small, satisfying splashes. She said, "Do you ever wish you'd gone? On the train?" "Yes." He thought for a long time. "Sometimes. But only in the way you wish for another chance to choose." "And would you choose differently?" He shook his head. "No. I think this was the choice." She smiled, soft and tired. "You always did believe meaning hides in the smallest things." "Maybe it does," he said. "Or maybe I just learned to stop asking for proof." The wind shifted. It carried the smell of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of burning leaves. Somewhere a door closed and the sound of a piano floated out. A student practicing a slow piece, wrong notes and all. She listened. "That's lovely." "It's imperfect." "That's why it's lovely." He looked out over the water. The surface had gone dark now, but a faint line of light still ran down the middle like a vein of gold. He said, "You know what I've been thinking?" "What?" "That we spend half our lives trying to explain what we meant, and the other half realizing words never do it justice." "Then why keep writing?" "Because silence deserves a witness." She smiled. "That sounds like something you'd put in a book." "Maybe it already is." A heron stood on a rock near the bend in the river, long and still. They watched it for a time, neither of them speaking. Finally, it lifted off, slow and graceful, its wings catching what little light remained. She said, "It's getting cold." He nodded. "We should head back." They rose together. She pulled her coat tighter. He offered his arm, and she took it without hesitation. As they walked, she said, "Do you think this is it?" "What do you mean?" "Our story." He thought for a moment. "I think stories like ours don't end. They just change rooms." She looked up at him. "And what happens in the next one?" He smiled. "Maybe peace. Maybe laughter. Maybe just quiet." I could live with quiet. You already do. When they reached the bridge, the lamps had come on. Their light fell across the water in long trembling streaks. They stopped at the center looking down. The current was slow, steady. He could see their reflections, two shapes blurred by the dark. Do you still write at night? She asked. Sometimes. When the world is still enough to listen. What do you write about? He looked at her. About this. About how people come back even when they think they won't. She nodded, her eyes glinting in the low light. Then write this one down right. I will. The wind carried the last light away. The sky turned the color of ink. She said, I think I'll walk home from here. He nodded. All right. They stood there another minute, not quite ready. Will I see you tomorrow? He asked. I don't know, she said. But you'll think of me. I always do. She smiled. Then that's enough. She crossed the bridge slowly, her steps fading on the boards. When she reached the far side, she turned and lifted her hand. He raised his in return. Then she walked out of sight. He stayed a while longer, the night around him soft and wide. The river murmured unending, and the lamps shivered in its reflection. He opened the notebook one last time. The river at dusk does not rush. It remembers. It holds the day the way a hand holds warmth. We pass, but it keeps the shape of us a while. He closed the book gently, slipped it into his coat, and began to walk. The town was quiet, the air cool, the future unhurried. He did not look back. Chapter 7 Winter Letters. The first snow came early that year, light at first, almost uncertain. It covered the roofs and softened the edges of the town. The river moved slower, carrying thin plates of ice that clinked faintly as they met and parted. He had stayed. Days passed with a quiet rhythm. He woke, walked to the cafe, wrote at the table near the window. The same seat each morning. The same cup of black coffee. He watched the bridge through the steam, its shape fading and returning as fog came off the water. She wasn't there. But sometimes he thought he saw her coat, blue against the white, though it was only strangers passing through. He began to write again, not stories, not essays, just letters. He didn't address them, didn't plan to send them. He wrote to her, but also to the silence between them. The first began simply. It snowed today, the kind that falls without sound. I thought of the bridge and how the river must look from your side of town. He stopped there, folded the page and placed it inside the notebook. By Christmas, the river had frozen over at the edges. Children played on the bank, their laughter carrying farther in the cold air. He spent the holiday alone, but not unhappily. There was a comfort in solitude when it didn't feel like punishment. He cooked himself a small meal, poured a glass of wine, and read from Rilke, the same lines she'd been reading the day they met. For one human being to love another. That is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks. He read it aloud slowly. The words filled the room, warm against the quiet. He wrote another letter. You were right. We don't fall out of love. We learn to hold it differently. Like heat cupped in both hands. Not to keep but to feel. He didn't fold this one. He left it open on the desk. January came sharp and clear. The cafe filled with the steady hum of regulars escaping the cold. He sat by the window as always. One morning, the waitress brought him an envelope. It came for you, she said. He looked at it. No return address. Only his name written in a hand he knew too well. He waited a long time before opening it. Inside, a single sheet. I'm in Boston for the winter. Teaching. The city feels too fast, but I walk the river every morning and think of hours. I read somewhere that water remembers its course even when frozen. I like that thought. Take care of yourself. E. He read it twice, then set it beside his coffee. Outside, the snow fell steady. He smiled. After that, he began answering her, this time with envelopes and stamps. He didn't expect replies, but he wrote anyway. You were right about the river. It remembers. The ice has cracked in places and you can hear it breathe at night. I think of that sound as language, slow, honest, deliberate. A week later, another letter came. I heard the sound once on the Charles. It's like the river whispering to itself, isn't it? I miss the quiet of small towns, though not the loneliness. Are you writing again? He was. He told her so. And soon their letters fell into rhythm, 2 pages, sometimes 3. They wrote about weather, books, stray memories. But under each line ran something steadier, an affection too practiced to vanish and too tempered to ignite. By February, the snow had grown heavy, and the world outside looked almost erased. He found comfort in the routine ink, paper, the sound of the postman's boots in the hall. He wrote, "You once said love is what remains when everything else stops making sense. I think I understand that now. It isn't noise or flame. It's endurance. Like winter. Like the river under the ice." Her reply came days later. "Endurance, yes. But also tenderness. You forget tenderness when you write about love. Maybe that's why I still read your words. They make me want to remind you." He laughed when he read it. A quiet, unguarded laugh that startled even him. By March, the ice began to break. The river found its voice again, low, certain, alive. He walked down to the bridge one evening. The snow had melted in patches, leaving dark earth beneath. The air smelled faintly of mud and thaw. He stood there listening. The water moved strong now, rushing to make up for lost time. He took from his coat a letter he hadn't sent. The last one. "I think we found our way back, though neither of us moved. Perhaps love doesn't live in the moment of meeting, but in the decision to keep seeing." He folded it once, then tore it cleanly down the middle. He let the halves go, the wind catching them, the river taking them under. That night, another envelope waited at the inn. "The semester's nearly done. I'll come back in spring. If you're still there, meet me at the bridge at dusk. If not, I'll know you're writing." He held the letter a long time before setting it on the table. Outside, the wind carried the smell of thawed earth through the open window. He could hear the river again, alive beneath the dark. He smiled, folded the page, and placed it in his notebook, next to all the others. Chapter 8: The Return in Spring. Spring came late, as if unsure of its welcome. For days, the river swelled under rain that didn't stop. Then one morning the light broke through, and everything seemed to breathe again. The trees by the bridge showed the first buds. Children ran with kites that caught the wind off the water. He watched from his window, the same seat as before, a notebook open, untouched. It had been nearly 3 months since her last letter. He didn't count the days anymore. But he knew the rhythm of waiting by heart. The cafe smelled of coffee and thawed wood. He sat at his usual table. The waitress poured his drink without asking. "Looks like spring's finally here," she said. He nodded. It always finds a way. Outside, the river glimmered with sunlight. The bridge looked newer somehow, washed clean, ready. He closed the notebook. "Keep the change," he said, and stood. He walked the path by the river, his shoes damp with the thawing earth. The willows had begun to green, their branches trembling in the wind. He could feel something stirring, expectation maybe, or the ghost of it. At the bridge he stopped. The water moved fast now, full of the mountain melt. He leaned against the railing and waited. It wasn't long before he saw her. She came down the path from the far side, wearing that same blue coat, though the hem was darker now, worn from travel. When she saw him, she smiled, small and certain. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would. I didn't believe you. You never did." She laughed softly. "I suppose not." They stood together a while, the river talking beneath them. She reached into her bag and drew out a small bundle of letters, tied with a thin piece of twine. "These are yours," she said. "Every one you sent." He looked at them but didn't take them. "I thought you'd thrown them away." "I tried," she said. "But I couldn't. They kept sounding like home." He nodded, the words slow to come. "I didn't know what else to send." "I know," she said. "That's why I read them." The wind moved through the willows, making a sound like whispering. They leaned against the rail, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the water. "It's strange," she said, "being back. It feels like time waited here." "It didn't," he said. "It just changed slower." She smiled. "You still speak like you write. And you still listen the same way." They crossed the bridge together, step by step, their pace unhurried. When they reached the other side, the path opened into the field where the wildflowers would bloom soon. The grass was still pale, but it held the promise of color. She said, "Do you remember that summer by the lake?" "Yes. You burned your hand on the pan. And you said, 'Now you'll never forget I was here.'" He smiled. I was trying to be clever. You were succeeding. They laughed quietly. Felt easy the way it used to. They sat on the bench beneath the old willow. It creaked when she leaned back. I kept thinking, she said, how strange it was that we could know so much about one another and still have space left between us. That space is what made it real, he said. We never tried to fill it. We just kept crossing it. She looked at him for a long time. You never remarried? No. Why not? He shrugged. Because no one else wrote back. The sun climbed higher. The light caught the river in long flashes, like someone striking metal. She said, I miss this sound. The river. Yes. It never argues. It just goes. He nodded. That's why I stayed. And why I came back. She looked at him, her eyes quiet and steady. Do you think we were ever wrong? About what? About leaving. About coming back. He thought a while. I think we did what we could. And maybe that's what makes it right. She reached for his hand. He didn't move at first. Then he let her take it. Her palm was warm, her fingers slender, familiar. It feels the same, she said. It should. After all this time? Especially after. They sat there hand in hand while the world went on around them. The birds above the river, the laughter of children, the wind through the grass. It all moved like one long, slow breath. At last, she said, I have to go back in May. Just for a while. I know. But I'll come back again. He nodded. You always do. And if I don't? He smiled. Then I'll wait. The river doesn't mind. They rose together. She brushed a leaf from her coat. He said, would you like to walk to town? I'd like that. They turned toward the path, the bridge behind them, the air full of light. As they walked, she said, you never asked me what made me write that first letter. No, he said. I figured you'd tell me when it mattered. She smiled. It matters now. Then tell me. I couldn't forget the way you said goodbye. It sounded like you meant forever. And I needed to prove you wrong. He looked at her. You did. At the edge of town, the church bells rang. Noon. The sound rolled out over the roofs and down the river valley. She stopped walking and turned toward him. Do you still write at night? Sometimes. What about? About this, he said. About how the river forgives everything it carries. She stepped closer. Then write this one down right. I will, he said. They stood there a moment longer, no rush, no promises, only the quiet certainty of presence. The wind moved gently through the budding trees, and the town seemed to hold its breath. He thought of the letters, the long winter, the way love changes shape but not direction. She said, it's good to be home. He nodded. It always was. Chapter 9. A room filled with light. The house had been empty for years. Dust on the windows, ivy in the cracks. He unlocked the door with a hand that trembled, not from age but from remembering. The air inside smelled of cedar and old paper. She had arrived the day before and sent a note by the innkeeper. Come after morning. The light is best then. So he came. He stood for a while in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. Then he saw her. She was near the window, bent over a small table, opening boxes, wiping the glass panes with the cuff of her sleeve. The sunlight fell across her hair in thin gold lines. She looked up. I wasn't sure you'd find it. I walked past it twice, he said. Didn't recognize it without the noise. She smiled. It's quieter now. Everything is. He stepped inside. The floorboards creaked, remembering footsteps. He set his hat on the table near the sunlight. You kept the place, he said. Not really. It kept itself. He laughed softly. Houses don't do that. This one does. It waits. Like you. He didn't answer. He was looking at the light on the wall, the way it shifted as clouds passed. It moved like water. She handed him a cup of coffee, black, strong, familiar. Still the same, he said after a sip. I figured you hadn't changed either. He looked at her over the rim. Some things don't. She nodded toward the table. Letters lay scattered, unfolded. You kept them all, he said. I thought I might need them someday. For what? To remember what it felt like to be understood. They sat across from each other. The morning stretched wide and gentle. Birds moved outside the window. The trees were full now, leaves trembling in soft wind. He said, I started writing again. Something new. She smiled. A book. No. Just words. Not sure what they want to be yet. Maybe that's the best kind. He nodded. I don't know if they're for anyone. They don't have to be, she said. Not everything worth saying needs to be heard. They were quiet for a while. He watched her hands, small, graceful, steady. Time had marked them, but gently. She caught him looking. You're staring. I'm remembering. What exactly? Your hands. The way they move when you talk. She laughed. I'm afraid they talk too much. They always did, he said. That's what I liked. She rose and crossed to the shelf, pulling out a book with a cracked spine. It was one of his, first edition, the one with the misprint on page 70. I used to read this aloud, she said. To no one. To yourself. To the house. To keep the silence company. He smiled. Did it help? Sometimes. She looked at him, her voice soft. It's strange to read words that once came from someone you loved. They start to sound like prayers you never meant to say. He nodded. I know that feeling. The sun climbed higher. Light filled the room completely now, warm and alive. It touched the letters on the table, the books on the shelf, the curve of her shoulder. He said, It feels smaller than I remember. That's because we're closer now. He looked at her, unsure if she meant the room or them. Maybe both. She said, Do you ever wish we'd stayed here back then? No, he said. We would have ruined it. She smiled faintly. You think so? I know so. We were too hungry for answers. Now we just let them sit. A clock ticked somewhere in another room. The sound was steady, comforting. She said, I sometimes wonder how much time we wasted. He thought about it, then said, None. We spent it living. That's what makes this possible. She nodded, eyes bright with something unspoken. You make it sound easy. It isn't, he said. But it's simple. The wind outside shifted, carrying the smell of lilac through the open window. He closed his eyes. That scent, he said. You used to wear it. I still do. He opened his eyes. I thought I imagined it. You didn't. She smiled, slow and knowing. You never did. They moved to the sofa near the window. The light there was softer, filtered through lace curtains she'd washed that morning. Tell me about your writing, she said. He hesitated. It's not about anyone, but it keeps ending up being about us. Then maybe that's what it's supposed to be. I'm tired of writing about what's gone. Then write what stayed. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe that's you. Her eyes held his. Maybe it always was. The afternoon stretched. Outside, a cart passed on the road, its wheels crackling over gravel. Inside, the room hummed with stillness, the kind that only comes after long waiting. She leaned back, her head resting against the wall. I thought I'd forgotten this light, she said. How it fills the whole room like forgiveness. He nodded. It's good light. It doesn't ask for anything. Maybe that's why I came back. Because of the light? She smiled. Because of what it reveals. He reached for her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. Her fingers curled around his, light but sure. They sat that way, saying nothing. The world outside went on, birds calling, branches moving, the slow turning of hours. Inside, time felt softer, less cruel. When the light began to fade, she said, You'll stay for supper? If you'll let me cook. You still can. I never forgot. She laughed. Then I'll let you. He stood, stretching his legs. I'll need to walk to town. The market closes early. She rose too. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know, she said. But I want to. He smiled. Then let's go. They stepped outside together. The sun was low now, gold against the tops of the trees. The path to town curved along the river, green and soft with new grass. They walked side by side, the air warm with the promise of evening. He said, I forgot how beautiful this place can be when it forgives winter. She nodded. Everything looks softer when it stops trying to survive. He looked at her. Do you think that's what we've done? Maybe. Or maybe we've just learned how to live in the light. As they reached the bridge, he turned back to look at the house. The windows glowed in the setting sun, and for a moment it seemed the whole room shone. He thought of all the years behind them, all the letters, the silences, the small mercies. He thought of what it meant to come home, not to a place but to a person. She slipped her hand into his again. He didn't speak. There was no need. The river moved beneath them, clear and forgiving. The light lingered a little longer before fading into gold. Chapter 10: The House That Stayed. Morning came with rain. Soft at first, the kind that hums against the roof and fills the air with its own calm. He woke to that sound and to the faint smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. For a moment he didn't move. The house was breathing again. He could hear her footsteps, measured, light, unhurried. The sound fit the space as though the rooms had been waiting for it. He sat up, pulled on his sweater and went to her. She was standing by the stove watching the kettle. Her hair was loose, her face still pale from sleep. "You're awake," she said without turning. "I couldn't stay in bed." The rain sounded too much like conversation. She smiled. "Then it's polite rain." He took the cups down, set them on the table. They moved around each other easily, wordless, as people do when time has taught them rhythm. When they sat, the rain had grown steadier. It brushed the windows in thin silver strokes. "This house," he said. "It doesn't seem as empty anymore." She nodded. "Houses remember kindness. That's what keeps them standing." He looked around. "It feels different now. Warmer. Like it forgave us for leaving." "Maybe we forgave ourselves," she said. He stirred his coffee and let that thought settle. After breakfast they went room to room. She opened curtains that hadn't been touched in years. Light spilled across old photographs. Faces blurred, smiles faded but not gone. "Do you want to keep these?" he asked. "All of them," she said. "They're proof that we existed once." He traced the edge of one frame. "We still do." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "We do." In the study, he found the desk where he'd written his first story. The paper was brittle now, yellowed at the edges. He lifted one page and the dust rose like memory. "I thought you'd burn these," she said. "I thought I had." He smiled faintly. "I suppose even fire has mercy." She touched his arm. "You were young then. You needed to start over." "I did," he said. "And I did it again and again. I just didn't know I'd circle back here." By afternoon the rain had cleared. The air smelled of wet grass and the sweetness of the lilacs outside. They ate by the window, soup and bread, simple and warm. She said, "I was afraid the house would feel smaller once you came." "Does it?" "No," she said. "It feels right." He nodded. "Then maybe it was waiting for both of us." They walked down to the river later. The water ran high from the storm, thick and brown, carrying bits of branch and blossom. She said, "It's the same river, but it looks older." "So do we," he said. "Do you mind?" "No," he said. "It suits us." They laughed quietly. The bridge gleamed wet in the light. He reached for her hand and she gave it without pause. That evening, he wrote again at the old desk. The house creaked and settled, the sound of age that no longer felt lonely. Outside, the last of the rain tapped against the leaves. He wrote, "We don't rebuild the past. We learn to live inside what remains. The house that stayed is not made of walls, but of what refuses to go." He paused, looked toward the kitchen. She was there, humming softly, arranging flowers in a jar. The smell of lilac reached him again. He smiled and kept writing. Later, she came to stand beside him. "Still at it." "Just a few lines," he said. "About us. About what lasts." She touched the page. "You always make it sound simple." "It is," he said. "We just spend our lives making it difficult." She bent and kissed his hair. "Keep writing," she whispered. "I'll make tea." Night came gently. They sat by the window with their cups, watching the light fade. The lamps in town flickered to life, small constellations across the hill. She said, "I used to think home was a place. Now I think it's a person." He nodded. "Or a few words. Or a silence shared long enough to matter." "Maybe both," she said. "Maybe that's all it ever was." When they went to bed, the rain started again, soft and forgiving. He lay awake for a while, listening. The house creaked, the wind moved, and he could hear her breathing beside him, slow, sure, steady. He thought of the years that had carried them apart and back again, of letters and rivers and bridges and rooms filled with light. He thought of how love, when it endures, asks for nothing but presence. He closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, "This is what stayed." And for the first time in years sleep came easy.